This is the Bema Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today we are following Qohelet and Josh Bossé into many parties to see if we can find any meaning in joy.
And as we know, here on the Bema Podcast, the party is pretty important.
It is. We're big fans of the party here.
But before we get into that, we need to do our obligatory warning. I'm going to be doing this every single episode, and I'm saying this so that even if I forget to do it, I'm going to force Brent Billings to edit one in or something, because we really need to remember this book is very, I think, tricky for a particularly a Western audience, because if you will remember from the previous episode, this is a philosophical work, but unlike 100% of our style of philosophy here in Western culture, it is not abstract. It is rooted in the material world, both in its metaphors and how it reasons things out. And not only that, this book is possibly the only biblical book that has a individualistic lens. Qohelet is a radical individualist. Now, that does not mean that she has the exact same culture of individualism that we're brought up in, but it's easy for us sometimes to not be aware of how much we might project because of that overlap with her lens and ours. But what this does mean is that even though Qohelet talks about God, Qohelet talks about Israel, Qohelet does not talk about partnership, the story, a divine plan, an arc, none of that. It is all, as Qohelet will say, under the sun. It is rooted in human experience. And so if we were going to be really anachronistic and project and use some modern terms very loosely, we could say that Qohelet is a materialist and humanist work. And what this will really mean, the most important thing that we have to remember, is that the actual way that Qohelet is reasoning is not by just putting out a point, here's what I think, here's why I think that that's true. Qohelet is using experiential reasoning, very concrete metaphors. I went to this place, I saw this, and it's those metaphors, those images, and the tension between them that leads us along her thought process.
So I think maybe one of the dangers, if I were to put what you just warned us about in my own words, potentially, tell me if I'm wrong, Josh, is that we can hear the language and the discussion of Qohelet in this book of Ecclesiastes and think to ourselves, oh, like I'm home. This is very Western. This is very me. But even the fact that it's using things that feel that way, it's rooted in and coming from a different place with a different assumption and pointed in a different direction than what we're used to. So we would do ourselves a disservice to relate to them like we normally would.
Absolutely. And that's where, Ecclesiastes is a controversial book. It was almost not in the canon. Even Elle told me, I didn't know this, but apparently in the Mishnah, there's a whole debate over whether holding a scroll of Ecclesiastes makes you dirty, makes you unclean.
Right. I've heard that before. Yep.
And I think that this is where, like you said, Marty, we'd be doing ourselves a disservice if we just heard it through our own ears. And when Qohelet pops off and says things like, oh, everything's just meaningless, if we just take that in a straightforward, logical Western way and say, this is Qohelet's opinion and conclusion, we'd be way off the mark. So with that, if we're willing to kind of crane our neck and look at this with a little bit different perspective and spend some time, we're going to find some really, really juicy stuff because, man, this book goes places. But speaking of which, let's go someplace with this book. Brent, will you give us just the first two verses?
I said to myself, "Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish?
So, man, starting out with a bang in this new direction. The last episode had us leaving off with Qohelet, starting out on this journey to not just accumulate wisdom, but to understand wisdom itself. And we immediately jump into, joy. Let's see what's up with joy. Let's see what's good in life. And pretty immediately, Qohelet comes to a pretty rough conclusion. It's madness. It's ecstasy. It's beyond it's beyond our ability to wrap our minds around. But also, like, what does it do? Is literally the phrase there in the Hebrew of speaking of joy specifically. What does joy do? What's the point of joy? Now, this does not sound like a person who is very fun to have at a party. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say it sounds like me. It sounds like me at your party. Absolutely.
What does this guacamole accomplish?
Why are we playing games? There's no end to these. There's no point to these games. Stop it.
Yeah, and also I'm not sure if this holds up as true in all cases, but like I kind of feel like whenever Qohelet runs into something and declares that it's Hevel, it's like she's saying, like, oh, like, there's no point in looking into this further. Like, all right, experiment failed. We got to try something else. This is not the right way of doing this. So our first experiment with partying fails, but thankfully Qohelet is very determined. So let's pick up in verse 3 and see. Let's go 3 all the way to verse 11, Brent.
I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers, and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun.
Well. Kind of went from one extreme to the other there. We went from not seeing the point of the party to like a party that kind of broke out into a bunch of building projects. Like, that's not usually what I think of when I think of partying. What the heck is going on here?
She was just double checking. She was going from like, I didn't think laughter was good, but I had to make sure.
Indeed. And I also love her second attempt. She's like, all right, let's get some wine in the mix. Let's get some maybe I'm a little too uptight. And I think literally the phrase there in the Hebrew is wine to draw her flesh, while letting wisdom lead her so that she could like seize this the folly that she's like trying to get a hold of. Like, what is this, like, people just being dumb and having fun? Like, how do they do that? How do you just stop thinking? Which I'm sure a lot of people out there can resonate with. But again, the point of that was back in verse 3 is to see like what's good for people. What is a good thing for a human to do under heaven for the few years of their lives? Again, coming back to this theme of time that we already explored in the last episode, but will kind of be the center of every episode in one way or another. So how do we spend our time? What's actually a good thing to spend your time with? And I love this because, a lot of times, like you were saying earlier, Marty, we kind of, especially those of us, we could be a little in our heads. It could be hard to see the point of what other people do when they're enjoying their time. And I feel like Qohelet has a pretty open mind here and is genuinely saying like, hey, is there anything to this? Is this actually like good for people? Just going after like what seems best to you, what you desire, what brings you joy. Is chasing that like just a good way to spend your life? And that is kind of what kicks off the stream of building projects. The beginning in verse 4 with I enlarged my works. And what's interesting, did anyone, either of you, notice anything stick out to you in that like kind of stream of large works that Qohelet set to?
There doesn't seem to be anything done with any of it. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and planted all kinds of fruit trees. I made reservoirs to water groves. I bought slaves. I owned flocks. I amassed silver and gold. But it never says anything about like doing anything with any of that. Never harvesting, never whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't say like, oh, I went for some nice walk. I slept in a hammock in that garden.
Yeah. Or even there's like a prophetic refrain that where you built houses and lived in them. You planted vineyards and ate their fruit. There's like there's the reciprocal, and yet that's missing here. I can see what absolutely.
Yes, and that will become a major theme the closer we get to the center of this book. But yeah, it is interesting that is not present, and there's a lot of amassing, there's a lot of building, but not a lot of doing stuff with it. That's a very keen observation. Was there anything about the specific works that Qohelet undertook that sparked anything?
Well, they're very natural, like creation oriented. I'm thinking of your last conversation in the last episode. It made me think of Genesis language. It made me think of, I couldn't tell if I is this the Garden of Eden? Is this Genesis 1? Like, where is this landing? But it's very creation-y. It's very natural. It's water, it's vineyards and gardens, it's trees and whatever. That's what I kept thinking.
Yeah. In fact, in verse 5, maybe it'll pop out a lot more in the Hebrew. Qohelet makes gardens, and then the word for parks there, it's pardasim.
Oh, cool! Like the paradise idea.
Yeah, and it's a pardasim filled with every kind of tree that bears fruit.
Hey.
And we have, interestingly, the word for ponds of water is berachot. It's the same root as the word for blessing, which also kind of makes sense, I guess, with irrigation. These are ponds that are blessing trees. So we have all these trees sprouting. And then what's interesting is, let's even roll it back. What's the very first thing that Qohelet makes?
Was it the house?
It's a house. It's a house, then a vineyard, then the garden and the trees and irrigating and growing the trees. And to me, this is all, yes, very Genesis 2, very, God built a house for us. And not only that, after we have all this irrigation imagery, then we get a lot of people-centered imagery. I got servants or slaves, and then sons of the house. Then there were people born in the house. I wonder if this is very intentionally following like a Genesis 2 image of, I created this house, I created this world filled with all these, natural wonders and beauties. And then I put people in there, and then there were people born in the house, and then they had flocks and herds. And I was looking to see, I tried to find better connections to see if there was like maybe more explicit connection to the patriarchs or something. Maybe it's like, is Qohelet kind of sketching out the beginning of God's story here? I didn't find anything super solid on that. But what is interesting is that after it talks about gathering silver and gold and treasures, in my mind, I'm like, is that like talking about the Mishkan? Like now we're gathering things to, anyway, didn't get super far down that road. Maybe you at home will find something. But then we get to this final bit about the pleasures of humanity and a harem, it said in your translation, Brent.
Which has the footnote, the meaning of the Hebrew for this phrase is uncertain.
Yes.
Of course it is.
Yeah. And also, speaking in the voice of Solomon, like that's also not a crazy thing to say at all. Like that is literally very true of Solomon.
Yeah, this little chunk is not doing anyone any favors if they're trying to argue but that this is not a book of Solomon.
It's true. Although, it is, the one thing I want to point out is that when it talks about the singers, the word there is not, my translation here says, I provided for myself male and female singers. I don't know what yours says, Brent.
Yeah, I acquired male and female singers.
Now, the word there is actually asa. I made for myself male and female singers.
Sure. Right.
Yeah. Interesting. And then also, this is, again, kind of a side note, but that word for concubines, it is, if I remember right, it's shidot. And I know that word, Elle talked about how there's a lot of like Persian loan words in this. I might be wrong, but I think that word can also be connected to a word for like a lord. And similarly, the word for a singer, sharim, is similar to sarim, which is a word for a prince. So we could also see, if we're taking this as a parallel on God's creation, we have, the house, the vineyard, the natural world. Now we have servants, people to tend to it. And then we have people, born into it and dedicated to it, flocks and herds, shepherding creation, gathering silver and gold. And now we have singers, people giving praise, people leading, like kind of going up this, I guess, human hierarchy of people in relationship to their creator. Now, regardless of how literally you want to take that, I don't think Qohelet is calling herself God by any stretch. But I think that what this is supposed to evoke is that like Genesis 2 creation image of, God, like when it talks about when God created the trees, for example, God created them to be desirable to us, to be something that gives pleasure. It tastes good when you eat it. And there is something in this that is not just about, fulfilling base desires, which I think is important to note. We don't all have like a base desire to create a garden. This is a desire to like engage with the world, to make something that is also connected to our desires, but it's not, I think that is kind of in one of those categories of desire that we don't have that like gut knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, that's a sinful desire. It's like that there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And I think that that's really what Qohelet's getting at here. Qohelet is not just like, let's party as hard as possible and just get me the 80 most illegal drugs and I'm going to do them all in a row and, then just see what the heck happens next. Like, this is not just pure hedonism. This is a thoughtful exploration of just approaching life from the perspective of, what if I just did what seemed like the best, most interesting, most joyful thing in front of me?
There is at least twice, if not other sentences in language as well, that the author says wisdom was guiding me, like very intentionally making the point. This was not just pursuing hedonistic pleasure. I went to pursue joy and pleasure with wisdom being my, I'm looking for something. I am inquisitive. I am curious. So it's not just indulgent, but there's a point behind it. Yeah.
And that's where, to me, the parallel between this and God creating the world becomes very interesting. And this is where I love the question that or the observation you brought up, Brent, of like, it seems like, Qohelet doesn't really do anything with all this stuff that she makes. It doesn't talk about her enjoying it, which would be interesting from the God angle of like, God made these things for us. But it kind of flips that whole question around and is kind of like, why did God make all this stuff? Why did God create this whole complex world? Was it just for love of the game? Does God just enjoy creating things? And if so, like, is that where we get the joy from it? Like, what's behind that?
Yeah, the NIV collapses it in the translation, but the NET points out that phrase "for myself," which the NIV gives you the first time, I built houses for myself, But that for myself phrase appears 7 times over the 5 verses there.
Oh, very interesting.
7 times. Ah, it's silly.
Did I say 7? 8 times. Sorry.
Oh, 8 times. Okay.
Well, then it can't be anything, certainly. Well, we did get in the last chapter, there were the 7 Hevels.
Okay. Yep.
If you add up the Hevel with the Hevelim as 1 and 2, it gets to
Got it.
7. And here we have 8 for myself. And in fact, man, that's like, I should have thought of this. I talked a little bit about Lech Lecha last time.
Yep.
And how like it's through Qohelet, like not just saying like, oh, I'm going to pile up all this wisdom and just be the wisest person to ever be wise. Like she has this turn where she's like, I actually want to understand wisdom more deeply, like almost kind of an intimacy with it rather than just stacking it up. And even though, you know, wisdom brings greater anxiety and grief and sorrow and all those things, it's worth it because Qohelet is doing this not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire for intimacy. And here, I think we are seeing Qohelet kind of pressing into that. Like, what is that actual desire? Like, even if it's guided by wisdom, even if it's, you know, within these safe boundaries, like what is the end of that? And we see the conclusion there of like genuinely her heart found joy. Oh yeah, verse 10 right there. And this I'm reading in this is NASB. I didn't refuse anything that my eye desired. I didn't restrain my heart from any pleasure. My heart was pleased, and I believe that word there is it's the word for joy, sameach, simcha. I was pleased in all the struggle, the actual struggle of it, not the enjoyment of it after the fact, but the struggle of figuring out how to make this garden work, the struggle of building the house, of, you know, all the trouble that goes into the effort that goes into building all these things. That in and of itself brought joy. And I think, you know, a lot of times in our culture, like that's treated as like the highest thing, to actually love the work that you do. Like, oh, you know, you love what you do and you'll never work a day in your life, right? That's the saying. And we see Qohelet saying like, yeah, I experienced that. I actually enjoyed the process. I wasn't just trying to, you know, hit my, you know, serotonin button as many times as possible. Like I was engaged and I enjoyed it. My heart was actually pleased. And that was my entire reward, my entire portion. And this goes back to that idea of Yitron. That's why in the next verse, even though I enjoyed doing it, it was a fun project. I enjoyed myself. There's nothing extra. There's nothing that transcends and answers that question of, you know, what's really, what's the meaning of life? You know,
when you have talked about this word, Josh, Yitron, and the way you've explained it with UNL in the last episode, like the thing that just keeps coming to mind, especially when you use the language you use to talk about that, is Jesus as a wisdom teacher, where he keeps coming. What is the thing that he says? You can do this, but that will be your only reward. If you give to the poor, like don't announce it, because if you do, that will be your own. There will be no extra. There will be nothing else that runs over. There will be nothing else that remains. When you fast, like if you want to like make a big deal about it and make a big show of it, that's fine. But there will be no extra reward. Like that's what I keep, like Jesus is the ultimate wisdom teacher of, this is what Qohelet taught us. Like you can either do this for some reason, and that's going to be later on in the book, for some that's going to be later on in your series for some other reason. But if you do this just for the base realness of the experience itself, that's it. Like that's the reward. That's what you get.
Absolutely. And Qohelet is walking us through that exact same point, you know, treasures on earth. And that is
great.
The domain that Qohelet has limited herself to in terms of, you know, what she is exploring. This is all under the sun. And even under the sun, even herself sitting there, not thinking about treasures in heaven or the hereafter, like strictly speaking, in a materialist, humanist, like everything that exists is what's here on earth, you know, even if we just limit it to that, what I found at the end of just doing all these things that were fulfilling was I sat back and I said, I still didn't do it. That still didn't give me anything extra, nothing transcendent, nothing that went above that. It was just something that was genuinely engaging and fun. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it is in terms of like looking for deeper meaning, it's futile and it's hurting wind. There isn't anything that surmounts that. Brent, did you have any other thoughts on this before I ask you to read more text?
Just that I love that picture of herding the wind.
Yes,
I'm enjoying that more and more each time I hear you say it.
Yeah, Qohelet is has some really potent images up her sleeve. All right, well then, let's go ahead and read verses 12 through 17.
Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom, and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind, a herding the wind.
Mm-hmm. Oh, like wind slipping through your fingers. Dang. So we have slipped down a totally different path, it seems like. So Qohelet has gone down this path of joy and seemingly, hasn't, maybe made like some kind of excoriating moral judgment, but kind of just found that there wasn't, that didn't answer the question. So then she turns and considers wisdom itself, turned to face wisdom and this ecstatic madness and folly. And so it, again, kind of is taking on a new perspective, right? We have to remember these concrete metaphors. When Qohelet just says, I turn to this, it's not like I then move to the next point. It's, all right, I am taking on a fresh perspective and is focusing on these three: wisdom, ecstasy or madness, and folly. And then poses this question. And the verse order here is weird. I have seen some translations just straight up change the order of these verses. And particularly when we get to the end of it. But we initially have this statement, I saw wisdom surpassing foolishness as light surpasses darkness. We might say another little nod to the creation story.
Sure.
And that there is a clear and obvious benefit to wisdom over foolishness. Like, one is definitely better than the other, but then by the same token, just by shifting that perspective and widening out a little bit, the benefit that wisdom has over folly, like, is it a real benefit? Or is it just like a marginal difference? Because guess what? We're all going to the same place. They both go into, death at some point. And so if you go into it with your eyes open or your eyes closed, it doesn't really change what happens. So is this a real benefit or not?
I feel like there's like a third, on one hand, it feels like a separate stream. On the other hand, I feel like Qohelet is, okay, she started by looking at just joy and being like, well, this isn't it. And then she's like, oh, okay, let me look again. And so she chases it with substance, finds that there is joy, but at the end, that is all there is. And then says, so let me turn around and face it. And let me turn around and face this thing that I've seen and see if that's all there is in the moment. Now, what is the lasting value? Oh, wait, there is none.
Yes.
Like it actually feels, on one hand, I'm like, oh, this doesn't make, I feel like we're just bouncing all over the place. On the other hand, I'm like, oh, this actually makes a ton of sense. Qohelet's going, okay, this is meaningless. Okay, let me look again. Okay, there's actually something here. Okay, there's really something here, but that's all there is. Let me step back. Oh, wait, there's what? There's nothing here at the end, like when it's all said and done. So I really like what's happening as you're framing it like this. This look again. Okay, now look and judge kind of an idea.
And what's brilliant about this too is that this actually incorporates Brent's observation earlier, because the very first thing that Qohelet brings up when she's, considering these three things is, what is the person who's going to come after me? Speaking from this King Solomon perspective, who's going to be the one who comes after me? What are they going to do except what's already been done? Like, is this, even if I, set up the next generation, like, can they really do more than just all the things I've already seen? Can there be anything that I haven't cast my eye upon and just seen the futility of it?
Right.
But that initial question that she doesn't quite fully land on, but will come to as we go on. Like we get to the end and she talks about how like the remembrance won't go on even, which connects a lot to what we talked about in chapter 1, the images of, there are ancient societies that we don't even remember, and there will be a future society that won't even remember the society that'll be after us. Like, there is so much time that, you can't even know what your immediate successor will do with what you've made. And I think if we bring that back to the question of kind of this Genesis 2 parallel and creating this whole world, and this question of like, wait, but what are we going to do with it? Like, that is the question. What is going to be done with it? You can make an Eden. What's going to happen in that Eden? Are they going to, is everyone going to live in there in peace and harmony? Or is it going to get messed up? Or is it going to be misunderstood? Or, are we, in 10 years, is the Bema podcast going to mean something totally different than we ever intended it to? Like, those are real questions and things that we can't control any more than we can shepherd the wind. And putting in the center of it this question about wisdom, kind of the personal heartbeat of Qohelet. Like, she is the wisdom person, so that is her thing. And looking and saying like, oh, well, I know that for me personally, I'm going to end up just as dead as the fool next to me. So then, and I love how NASB translates it in verse 15. Why then have I been extremely wise? I love saying that about yourself. Why have I been extremely wise when I'm just going to die too? And I think that this question of legacy, of really the future, everything that they're going to rule over has already been made. And this philosophical quest that Qohelet's on, intertwines with the reality of just the future moving on past us, with this image of kings being succeeded, which again, using my lens of Qohelet evoking Solomon as a literary character, that is very, very relevant here, because what happens with Solomon? Solomon builds this great work. He builds this incredible temple. And what happens with his son, the next person after him? Completely go off the rails. And even to the point where like that is what divides the kingdom. Not the temple itself, but it's like, yeah, I can build this temple, and the next generation, do they even care about it? Does it even matter? The temple ends up becoming like the wedge point, which causes the northern tribes to say, well, they control the temple, so rather than have to go back and submit to them, we'll create our own sites of worship. You could even argue that it like brings incredible disunity and destruction to the people of Israel. So what a great like literary reference in that sense to the story of Solomon, and like, you don't know what your legacy is going to be at all.
It's like those two characters encapsulate the argument. Like, you could say Solomon being referenced as the wisest man who ever lived. In a lot of ways, his son comes off as like the biggest fool who ever lived. And yet at the end of the day, like, even when you consider their legacies, not great.
Yeah.
Don't really land. Both of them die. Everything moves on. Like, it's really great like you said, a great literary reference because of how it encapsulates the argument.
And that's where, when we get to verse 17, where Qohelet's like, I just hate life because all this work is now, and sometimes it's translated as grievous or unhappy. It's literally, the work which I had done under the sun was evil to me. And like, I got to think, if I'm, if we, did what Saul did with Samuel and, resurrected Solomon and took him and said, oh, here's what your son's doing. Like, I wonder how he would have felt about all the work he put into the temple and the other building projects he had. Like, wouldn't that have all seemed a little bit like, oh, I wish I had, I don't know, I wish I had raised my son differently. Who knows what he might have thought. But nevertheless, like, all that work, you build this big, beautiful thing, and then the person after you, like, just totally, like, profanes it. Like, oh, that makes you wish you had never built such a beautiful thing to be destroyed. And I think that shows, like, not that there's no point in doing anything. God shouldn't have created the world. It's all just a mess. But rather, like, if we're just focused on building incredible things, focused on me and my vision and what I think is best, and let me just pour all my intent, pour my whole life into these grand projects, these great works, someone like that is not guaranteed. That is not something that is for sure. It could end up becoming something that is anathema to your very soul. And that, I think, kind of fleshes out what Qohelet means when she says, like, I did all these works and it was just nothing. At the end of the day, it was still Havel. I enjoyed doing them. I love the works themselves.
And yet it seems like Qohelet is like, but there is something that is guaranteed. Bad news, death. Like,
yes.
You can't guarantee legacy. You can't guarantee. But I can tell you the one thing we can guarantee, everybody's going to die.
Everyone's going to die. Yes, that is a big fixture of Qohelet's reasoning. And it is like, you can't argue with that. Death is guaranteed. And so, yeah, this is the tension that Qohelet is just going to keep exploring. So if this is not a fun tension for you, you might want to skip this, because this series, this book, just keeps layering on the tensions. And a lot of them are this, like, how do we actually face this tension? And that's why I love what you talked about earlier, Marty, of like, these taking these different perspectives, like, okay, I'm going to try this again. I'm going to see how this works. But then I'm actually going to take this experience and not just say, oh, okay, I grew as a person, or, oh, okay, like, that'll help me be better next time. But she is taking this and then looking dead in the face the big questions of, am I actually the fool? Does this even matter when I die? Like, all the biggest, most existential questions that we have, like, looking at those, but also, and I think this is crucial to us in the modern day, because a lot of times when we talk about, existential dread, it's something that gets us stuck. What I love about Qohelet is the, kind of like what you said earlier, Marty, like, feels like it's all over the place, is she doesn't, like, get bogged down by that. Like, when she does get to something that she's like, oh yeah, this is just meaningless, like, she doesn't just say, okay, well then, I'm just gonna lie in bed all day. Like, there is a push to a in one sense, a very deep level of trust, or at least commitment to this process, to this project exploration. And with that, let's finish up this book. Let's finish up this chapter here. Let's go verse 18 through 26.
I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish, yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who has not toiled for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days their work is grief and pain. Even at night their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too, I see, is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth, to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind.
Really cheery note to end on there.
She's no respecter of chapter breaks, I'll put it that way.
Yes, not at all. But, we started out very much in the same line of reasoning we had just been talking about. What I really like is, Qohelet has a very, good literary flair, good, like, poetic flair to her language. And even touched on what you talked about earlier, Marty, that, like, prophetic refrain of, eating from the vine that you planted, or conversely, planting a vine and then someone else eats from it. That's like one of the negative prophetic images that's returned to a lot. And that's kind of what Qohelet evokes here, which is where I feel like that's the other strand of, like, in terms of genre. If Qohelet is more than just philosophy, it's like kind of prophetic philosophy in the way that it provokes, but without the same kind of prescription and call back to God and the story that we see. Very strange book.
Yes.
But that, mounting of the question of what do you actually get for all this work that you're doing? And what I love too is in, verses 23 especially, but kind of all throughout, Qohelet starts to add in, like, we would call it now, like the mental and emotional labor aspects of all this, talking about turning her heart to the struggle of despair, giving her heart over to despair, and the anxiety and the sleepless nights where your mind can't rest, your heart is still caught up in all these things. It's irritating, it's painful, it's all these things that we kind of touched on at the end of the last chapter, that the pursuit of wisdom brings grief and pain with it. But even without that, even just you're living your normal life, you're a welder or a car mechanic, like, you can still think about, like, yeah, what happens after I'm gone? What happens, if this or that goes wrong? Like, even our mind, even our heart is not safe from this all-encompassing labor, that the struggle that itself is fruitless. It's havel. It's just there's nothing that it produces, and it's worry about things we can't control. And it's one thing for us to be told, like, hey, don't worry about the things you can't control, but there's also a lot of things we can't control that we kind of have to worry about. Like, and I think that's what Qohelet gets to. It's nice to say platitudes online that encourage people to rest or be less anxious. Like, that's all fine. I'm not trying to criticize anyone who tries to spread that little bit of joy around. Not saying that's pointless. I'm not as mean as Qohelet, but there is a limit to that. That in and of itself does not solve the larger problem, and that is what Qohelet is facing down. Everything, all his days, painful, irritating. At night, even his mind does not rest. And this, I think, is where, if we are just focusing on the problems that need to be worked through, that is the situation we find ourselves in. Even more so when we think about the future we can't control and the past that we can't fix. More and more work accumulates. And this is where I think Qohelet sneakily makes some of the most consistent arguments for, in Bema speak, what we would call rest, the big capital R rest, not just necessarily a Sabbath practice, but rest as a element of God's fundamental mission. And I think that's what Qohelet gets to here at the end. And I think this is even better because translations don't capture this. When it talks about, in verse 24, to eat and to drink, to enjoy the fruit of your labor, the word that's used there is to let your nefesh, your soul, your very life, to let your nefesh see tov, to see goodness.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And that phrase of seeing goodness is like all over the place in this book. And it is always used in this context of, Qohelet will return to this refrain many times of just, enjoy the things that God has given you. And that is see the good, just like what God did in creation, which, maybe there's a little full circle on that with, pardon me. Maybe there's a little full circle on that with regards to the creation imagery earlier in this chapter. But regardless, Qohelet is not solving the problem here, but what she does say is I can definitely tell you the best thing that I have seen, the best advice I can give you right now is to just enjoy what you have been given, whatever you've been blessed with, whether that's a wonderful family, whether that's, good health, whatever it is. Enjoy that. Let yourself see the good in it. Don't just, if you only focus on the bad, that don't drive yourself crazy if you don't have to. Some people don't have that luxury and they have to look at the bad. We all do to some extent. So to whatever extent you're allowed to, see goodness. And I think that that's a really beautiful way of kind of recontextualizing rest in this context, because it's all from God's hand, and it's, you can't control it, you can't make it fruitful or productive, you can't make it have a point. The enjoyment itself and the acknowledgement of God in that enjoyment, connection with God, and seeing the goodness that God put in creation. Is there anything better than that? Qohelet has yet to find out, but we can certainly co-sign that here on the Bema podcast.
I feel like, I can't remember if he said this at the beginning of the episode, but last episode's talk being so much about the past, this one definitely has a future element, thinking of legacy and all those comments.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes, we and that is a big part of, I think even on a very small scale, a lot of times, I think about this all the time when it comes to art. I love making art, but so many times, I just won't do it because it's will this even turn out the way I want it to? Maybe I'll just, watch a TV show instead. At least I won't be disappointed in myself for doing that. Just kidding. Anyway.
Well, I think this kind of reminds me a little bit of the Naaman story, where what if Elisha had been like, why should I even bother with this guy? He's just going to go back to his own land. He's not going to have any resources. He's not going to know anything. He's not going to be able to do anything with what I've given him. But he facilitates that healing anyway.
Yes.
And I like your car mechanic analogy earlier. Why should I bother fixing this car? As soon as they leave with the car, I can't control how they drive. That they might just wreck it as soon as they leave. Why should I bother fixing it? And it kind of speaks to the value of doing it, even though you can't control it.
Yes. And I think this is that, man, I'm so glad you brought that together, Brent, because I feel like that is a very big element of the kind of malaise of our times, is that it when you feel like there's not just that you can't control the future, but when you feel pretty certain the future is going to suck, then people stop trying. They you'll have the car mechanic who's like, well, I'll fix it, but I'll do the most minimal effort possible because they're just going to drive it like an idiot, or it's going to be someone else's car or whatever. There is no reason to try. And I feel like, that's not the situation Qohelet is looking at, but it is very much our situation. And the problem of the future of both not being able to see it, and in, I think, our modern situation, sometimes not being able to imagine a positive future. Very interconnected questions. And I think, the Qohelet's call to rest and to simplicity and to, in a certain sense, not trying to make too much of things, not trying to do this big project she's doing and make everything connect to that. You got to kind of just accept the small, simple portion of like, hey, I have this thing to enjoy. I'm just gonna enjoy this. And these bigger questions, like Qohelet is not done with these. They will come back. The past and the future, Qohelet is going to be wrestling with these. Spoiler alert: the entire book. But especially because where we're at right now in the book, because we can't see a solution to like the difficulty of the future and not knowing what people will do with our own legacy. Like that is so personal and can be so disturbing that we can be forgetful of rest. And I kind of just want to circle here. I don't have a ton more to say, but I feel like the Qohelet here especially, I think, has made clear how big some of these questions are by not only talking about legacy, which is big for all of us individually, but not just the future, but the future from this like God positioned lens of like God's creation and what are we doing with it? What kind of legacy do we create for God, in a sense? Like the simplicity of Qohelet's prescription here at the end to just enjoy things, like on one hand is kind of a very I don't know, it's somewhat of an ironic, like it doesn't feel like she's dodging the question, but it also like it's kind of a consolation, I guess, of like, yeah, like this is still hanging over us, but I can tell you at least this much: enjoy what God has given you, rest in that. But the creation imagery and tying that into all these questions, like that is that's some potent stuff. Do either of you have any thoughts about this?
Just that Qohelet is a hard book to do in bite-sized chunks because you keep having to break the stream of consciousness. Like there is the author is building onto this. There's these building blocks, and it's hard to stop and be like, okay, what's our takeaway conclusion? That's tricky because it's like it's setting you up. It's setting you up. It's setting you up. It's setting you up. And it won't even deliver in the ways that we typically anticipate delivering. But I think that's you've framed this and the last episode really well to keep us coming along for the journey, reflecting on wisdom, because it's tricky. It's tricky to study this.
Yeah. And I'll say too with that, Marty, like it's also tricky to break it up because of how much repetition there is. Like when you study a big chunk of it at a time, you'll see like big shifts. But when you're just coming back to little chunks of text, it'll be like, wait, haven't you already said this before? Sometimes Qohelet has. Sometimes Qohelet is saying it in a new context or referencing back to it, or has just been repeating the same phrase in the same chapter. It's a very wily book, and one of my favorites for that reason. But the one thing I will leave dangling, maybe just for the audience at home to wrestle with for their own for the next week, because we'll get into this next time with Reed. There's another kind of big overarching question that is lurking in the background, and it concerns what we were talking about earlier, that with this question of why do you build all these things and not enjoy them? Like, why would you build all these things if you don't know like what your legacy is going to be and who's going to come next and do what with it? For Qohelet, she seems to be gunning for a question about like, what is God really up to? And sitting in our seats with Jesus in our back pocket and all this other text that comes after Qohelet, all this insight, that's a question that we could ask or answer, kind of offhandedly, but maybe just really sit with that. Like what, with all when you tap into your own existential strugglings, your own thoughts of legacy, and thinking about, if you put yourself in God's shoes and you go through the trouble of creating everything and you're really, really curious about what's coming next, like what does that do? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what you were talking about as far as like breaking this into chunks and stuff. This is kind of a big book, but not so big that you couldn't read it in one sitting. So maybe by the time we're all done, maybe I won't do it on the podcast necessarily, but sit down with this book and try to read it from front to back. I don't know what that would take, 30 minutes or so. A little longer than maybe you would normally read for in this sort of context, but try to catch those flows and stuff, or do it now, whatever.
Yeah.
If you're just like, I want to see what's coming. I want a preview of what's to come. That's fine.
Absolutely.
But yeah, being able to read in larger chunks, I'm never disappointed when I do that.
Yeah. See, I told you, Brent, we should have done a 12-hour long mega episode for this.
Oh man. I don't know if I have the endurance for that. I'm getting old, Josh.
Yeah. Well, we'll do that when we launch, what is it, Bayma Plus, premier streaming platform. And if you sign up for the diamond tier, then we'll do the 12-hour episode.
All right. Of course, you can find more details about our show at BayMonDiscipleship.com. You can use the contact page there to get in touch with us. Check out the news page to see what we're up to, where we're going to be. If you have some thoughts on Qohelet that you just have to share in person, you can track us down that way. And of course, everything we do is made possible by listeners like you who contribute to our work and join us in this wrestling and give us the resources that we need to produce all of these things and spend time digging into this stuff. And so we just appreciate that so much. But thank you for joining us on the Bayma podcast this week. We'll talk to you again soon.